My name is Kamogelo Lesabe, born in the north of Pretoria, raised in Garangua. So I'm a township girl through and through, between Sosha and Garangua. I'm oftentimes between Cape Town or Western Cape and Joburg, as I run a business that's also between the two regions. I primarily am a risk professional by career, providing consulting services in the banking industry, but I also run and am involved with multiple businesses ranging from tech to the wine industry. Vertical Group was sort of founded by myself and Nozi Kushope, right? Who we were in varsity together at the time. Nozi and I, by the way, had met in varsity while we were staying at the same residence, right? And what used to sort of bring us together, in addition to studying the same program at the time, was we used to come together enjoying whether a beverage of choice, most often than not being wine, right? To converse about aspects that we were going through, challenges that we were going through academically, but also tapping into what we want to achieve in the future, right? And that sort of became something that we were known for. If you find the reference people that they would sort of point you to was myself and Nozi. And I think after sort of being involved in multiple organizations, I was leading young corporate leaders at the time, and she was involved in Enactus South Africa, where we provided sort of consulting skills to multiple businesses, right, for strategy and growth. We realized that there's so much wealth that we have amongst us, right, with regards to how to bring a business from ideation into sort of product into market. Why don't we come together and build a business? And at the time, I think we spent a good year, because that was roughly around end of 2015 and beginning of 2016. And we kept racking our brain thinking, okay, great, we are clear that we want to start a business. However, what business do we want to start? And you keep then having these conversations over wine, up until one day you realize that actually this is what we're passionate about. And how about we actually create a business around something that we love? Because we knew that when you step into business, it's going to sort of like fade off if you don't do something that you're passionate about. Nozi and I do not come from a winemaking background, right? Now, when you create a product that falls out of the immediate comfort zone that you have, you need to be very strategic with gathering research information and sort of forming allies around you to make sure that it's a consistent value or business model such that the product can actually come to life, right? You mentioned something that is also very important, that this industry is it's characterized by being male dominated. One, but also being dominated by white males in the Western Cape. So we were coming as probably rebels in the industry. One, it's a company of two females. Two, we're very young. We're just literally green behind our ears. And here we come saying we want to change the way in which things are done in this industry. So we had to then find a way of how we are going to get into the industry, who we are going to align with, especially with expertise of how to make this product. Because I think initially okay, maybe we can make this product ourselves. But after sitting down and thinking, okay, what market do we want to play into? Do we want to sort of start our own market of saying, okay, we're creating wine, but this is an all new wine, like it does not exist now, we're going to create this market while we are also creating brand awareness? Or we are going to leverage on what the traditional aspect of the wine industry is in terms of the quality of the product and use that to expand. So then that required us to infiltrate into the system by getting people that have already been practicing in the industry. And that's quite a bit of a while. I remember there's a point where we went to the Cape Wine Expo, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was 2018, in fact, it wasn't 2017, 2018, just before we hit product to market. That was in September, and it was a whole lot of exposure, because I think that was the first point in time where it was dawning unto us that we're actually getting into the market. You're sitting there in of people that are big players in the industry, and one, they recognize, because they've been hearing on the ground that, okay, there are two young ladies that are coming up that are doing this and this and this. So get shocked out of your comfort zone that spaces are already sort of welcoming you. Your job is to sort of communicate the value that you are bringing to the market. A brand, I think, is definitely something like a feature, a symbol, an element that gets to characterize your product versus what exists in the market, right? And that now speaks to multiple things. It can be something of a mark, it can be something of a quality assurance in terms of this product. But what now then brand equity becomes is how the communication of that brand value becomes to your customer, right? So you communicate. So value is two-tiered, right? It can be value that is pushed forward, which is what you're communicating to your customer, but there's value also that what is customers reading of your value and how they are interacting with your product, which is the brand value or brand equity that we see in the market. I mean, for example, if I was going to share the slides that I was going to share with you, I was going to make an example in the footwear or sport industry, right? You have multiple brands in this industry, your Nike, your Adidas, your Reebok, your Jordan, you name it, right? But if you look at the stats of what is the highest performing brand in this industry, it's Nike. Others would argue as sports players that they're not the best in terms of quality, because runners definitely sort of like subscribe to Essex or however you pronounce it. Others will sort of resonate to another. However, you must be very sort of like aware of how Nike has positioned themselves in the market. If you look at how they take their value, it's a value proposition of saying, we are there with you. Whether you are just skating down the road to enjoy a sunny day, whether you are on the pitch about to take the most important shot of your life, whether you're succeeding for that shot or whether you are failing, we are there with you. I mean, if you check on YouTube page, in actual fact, they're the most consistent in terms of putting out material that gets to be in the face of people. And that is the that sort of brings an equilibrium between what you communicate as a business of your value versus what customers are reading of your value. We created our own product from scratch, right? Although it's characterized by the typical grapes that we find in the industry, we went from scratch and realized that, you know what, our audience and our target market likes a wine that is characterized by these aspects. And we had to literally go in between, back and forth. It probably took a good 8 months in order for us to bring in a product that is going to be of excellent quality, right? But also we had to be very strategic when we came out, because I think the conversation at the time was, okay, are you going to go into shelf life or are you going to own the entire distribution chain of the product, right? And I mean, you can attest to the fact that whenever you go into a wine aisle in a shop, it's saturated. You'll find multiple bottles participating or competing either on price, on how it looks, aesthetics, multiple areas, right? And we had to then decide to say, we do not want to be in a space where we are competing with people that have already established themselves. Rather, we sort of like create our brand awareness in a sort of vacuum, a beach market strategy, if so to say. Who are we going to target? How are we going to penetrate? How are we going to run the strategy in order that if we get to a point where our immediate sort of like direct distribution can no longer handle the amount of orders that are coming in, then we can leverage with your Woolies, we can leverage with your boutique shops to say, okay, our market requires this. They often have a footprint into your store, and then you have a bargaining chip, right? Because that is another thing, that you need to strategically place yourself where you have a bit of power against the person that you're negotiating with on the table. What helped us in terms of that was when we started and we brought the product into market, right? The initial thing was, how do we then make people aware of this wine, right? Because it's another thing. One, we don't play in the entry level market. Like you've indicated, it's a premium brand of wine. Now you're selling a bottle of wine average for about 160 or 185, and you don't want to just give out those bottles without exchanging value that they can relate with, right? And that's whole concept of wine conversations. Initially, it was just a concept of bringing multiple industry heads, people that are aspiring to do multiple things, great things, by the way, whether in corporate business as creatives, across the table, unknown to each other as they sit across the table in order, one, conversing about aspects that they are pushing in the industry to be able to wear their stains on their sleeves. But while they're having this conversation and enjoying a good meal, we are also servicing them with this wine, right? And as progressed and the whole ecosystem of what we were creating, unaware, by the way, we realized that there's an equitable product that we were creating in that aspect, of which the value was then translating into the customer loyalty to the wine brand itself. Think of it as a formula, right? The brand equity has multiple inputs that get to say whether it increases or decreases. And one of the important principles to brand equity is customer value. How well do you communicate the customer value? Because remember, one thing is for sure, right? There are multiple products of the same quality that are existing in the market. I'll give an example for people that are not necessarily in the business industry as entrepreneurs, that are sitting as entrepreneurs or employed in the corporate space, right? When you're applying for a specific job role, there are multiple CVs that are going to be there on the table. Your role is to distinguish yourself and to communicate firsthand the value that you're going to be providing in that space that gets to give you entry into whether an office for an interview or whatever the case may be. And on a larger scale in terms of business, it is about that. The first point of contact that they have of you and your brand, how do you capture them? How do you involve? Because remember, the relationship between money and a person is a very emotional connection, right? And as soon as you tap into the emotional aspect of a person and a customer, then it no longer becomes about the price that they get to pay out to you for this. It's more the value that they are extracting from it. Then as you communicate it quite effectively and efficiently towards how they resonate with you, that brand equity then rises. Now I'm saying now the opposite then exists, right? You have cases of multiple companies that we've seen in the industry that were oftentimes very complacent with the brand equity they had at a particular point in time. And they stopped or they forgot the equity that they had built and how they had built it. And then that starts then depreciating because the inputs that you were creating by communicating with your customer then sort of like falls to the ground. Your brand equity then now has to be communicated in channels. You need to be intentional about what channels are you going to use to communicate your value. And that is also directly sort of related to where your customers are interacting. So you can't say, for example, I'm servicing customer A and B who transact in a platform C, but I'm going to market and penetrate this brand value that speaks to them, by the way, 100%, but in platform E, which you're going to miss the whole strategy by all means. Now, the conversation is that as you create this value and you ensure that you are speaking to your customer, you need to find them at the right level and be able to hook them into where they need to transact with your product. I'll start with failures, guys. I love failures. So whenever people ask this wins and failure thing, I always start with failures, right? And the biggest, it wasn't a failure. It was a very important lesson, right? We lost a lot of money. We've lost a lot of money, and I remember me and my partner sitting at some point, because it's easy for you to like continuously take money and not keep record, but as soon as you sort of like do a reconciliation of the money that you've taken out that ended up in a fruitless exercise, then you realize how much you actually have invested in this brand. I remember there is one particular project that we took up in December 2018, just as we had just hit product to market. And although it was a great platform or a great deal in itself, but because it did not speak to our target audience and the value that we were providing, it ended up a dismal loss, right? Which then speaks to exactly what you and I are speaking about today. You might have the best thing on earth, but if you're not communicating to the right people or you're not servicing it in the right channel with the right value, then you're going to continuously run a well of losing money. And that was the biggest lesson that we learned, fortunately, in the beginning of our journey, because it's easy for you to to experience that loss and learn from it with a low turnover versus when you're then hitting a 5 million revenue turnover and you're losing that in those injections. So you get what I mean? We've been in the lockdown period, since March, right? And at the point where we were sort of getting into the lockdown period, we had because what we do is that because we don't have a big warehouse where we store our bottles this side, we keep the wines in barrels in Stellenbosch, and then as now products get to deplete, we schedule a bottling session and then bring the products down to Joburg in order for us to then go back into the sale engine, right? And at the time where we were experiencing the immediate lockdown, we were just in the process of about to scheduling the bottling session, right? And when we were communicating those to our customers, because our customers always wanted continuous sort of supply of the product, we had to be very honest to say, guys, this is where we are. We're all facing this challenge and everything has been placed on hold. And there's something that happened in that period at that point, but also right now when we experience the banning again of the alcohol sale, is that the sale of our alcohol and our bottles did not decrease as this was going down. In fact, it was more of, we've created so much trust with our customers regarding the service and the quality of what we're providing that they're no longer willing or against waiting for it for longer periods of time. So now you understand the equity that you're bringing to the market, that versus the convenience of them stepping into a spa right next to them, because they understand the value of what you're bringing, they are going to now in an unconventional way of transacting, and they're able to then wait for about 3-4 months at a given time before they receive their products at the convenience of it. So that was of great value for us. I think we were not special as opposed to any other company, right, that starts up. Well, small company that does not initially have a cash injection, because I think at the point one of the challenges that we were facing is that we did not have sort of like access to abundant funding that we needed. So at the time we were also working like as consultants in different companies, and we had to pull together the savings that we had put together or saved in order to inject into this, right? But that was not also enough, because as we kept losing money, we needed to have additional feed into the business while we are still sort of like bringing the value to the market, before then it starts kicking back into the sales that we generate, right? And initially that had to come with us funding the business in order to make sure that it still sustains, in order for it for us to make sure that we still continue running not profitably but efficiently the wine conversations that we were creating. And slowly, as I think we headed into the 9 months to 10 months period, that's when we started seeing a bit of a shift versus us funding versus the sales that were coming into the business. Because then now you've been able to commercialize the value of this wine conversation, and now people are paying for this value that you're providing in terms of the platform, but they're also paying for this product that you have been selling within this vehicle. And then that becomes sort of like a sustaining thing. So one of the things that we had to realize is that we needed to understand that balance and to be able to play strategically as to when is the right time for us to tip the scale, right? Because, for example, if you're providing the platform of wine conversation for free for the first 6 months, you need to have provided enough quality that on the 7th month, when you start charging, people are still having the appetite to come through. And that speaks to brand equity. And one could say that we were probably privileged between myself and Nozipho, that we had the privilege of being working while we were studying at the point when we were still earning income and be able to redirect that income into the business. Other people do not sort of like have that privilege and that avenue. But there's one thing, right, that if I recall correctly, the issue about bootstrapping is not necessarily about using the money that you have, because someone can argue while seeing this video and say, but I have 200 Rand in my account. How am I going to make this business work? Like, it's not tangible, it's not feasible. But there's something that happened. A friend of mine who's a chef, right, and owns sort of like a brand of catering, right, came to me and said, you know what, I want to actually start up this segment of the catering business. and this is the machinery that I need, but I do not have the capital, right? And one thing that I challenged him about is that, okay, I don't want you to go and dilute the equity structure of your business, but I need you to go and find a creative way of sourcing the money from the people that are in your network. Because one thing is clear, you don't have the money. However, you need to, and that is in essence the trade of business, because you need to be resourceful at any given time point. And what he did shocked me even till this day, because what he then did was to put up a notice to him, well, his friends and his networks, to say, guys, on an ordinary day, on an ordinary weekend, we would have been out together having a good time, whether at Moja Cafe, whether wherever, and standard, there would be bottles across the table. However, I'm coming to you, and whatever that, it would have served the purpose because they would have had fun, right? He says, but I'm coming to you with a counter proposal to say there's something that I'm trying to build here. And if you give me a piece of what you would have spent in that given time point, cumulatively, if one person gives 100 Rand across the network of people that I have, I'll have sufficient in order to get this equipment. Can I tell you? People were donating whether 100 Rand, 200 Rand, 300 Rand, bringing together the funds, which is the concept of crowdfunding, right? And that needs you to be able to communicate, okay, what is it that you need? Why do you need to do it? And how do I benefit in terms of putting that money, that additional 200 that I could have used to put petrol in my car? Why should I fund you? And that is the resourcefulness of saying, okay, what does my brand stand for? And what do you have to do with it in terms of who you are as a customer? Am I servicing you? How am I generally giving back into the ecosystem of the business? And today, as we speak, he's sitting with 3 equipments versus 2 that he had already budgeted for. So that is the concept that one needs to realize when they get into the business industry, that it's not about who's privileged or who's not. It's about starting with what you have, looking across the table as to who you can use, who you can leverage off of in order to get to where you need to go. One very important thing that I can say is that you're going to fail. Start knowing that failure is inevitable, right? The trick is being strategic with what you're going to fail in and how quickly you're going to get up from the failure, because failure is just a matter of this route that you took in order to execute something did not work. How do you quickly pick up yourself and devise a strategy? A friend of mine actually used to say I'm a contingency plan strategist, which means if one plan fails, I need to be able to come on my feet and be able to come up with another strategy to move forward. Quote unquote, being a bullshitter. That's the nature of business. What you have, be able to have plan A. If not, and don't start with saying, okay, I'm going to start plan A, plan B, plan C, and if I don't have plan C up to plan C, I'm not going to start. Because that's where we realize that most guys that are in the ideation phase never actually get into the startup phase, because you're so consumed with this creative aspect of the business. Can I tell you, I really don't have a business plan. Ever since I started my business, I've never had a business plan. I think for the longest time, for about 6 to 8 months, I spent a long time trying to build a solid business plan. And I realized that this is now then becoming a bureaucracy that's stopping me from getting into the market. And your customers care nothing about the business plan. They care about the business plan. Precisely. So for my advice is, start with failure in your mind. Just choose the failures that you're going to experience and pick yourself up. But 2, start now, start with what you have and start moving forward.